With a flicker, my pip-buck illuminated the stairway that stretched down under the concrete memorial. My hoof steps felt uneasy on the smooth stairs that I walked down. In the back of my mind, I was reminded of the stairway down in that tower. Shaking it out of my head, I reassured myself that the tower was a long time ago. I still can't believe they built this thing, Shadow said as he followed me closely. You deserve it, there's no doubt about that. He had stuck by my side for so long, never once leaving it. It's just so big. I, for one, recall that anyone complaining about that would get a very specific response from you. I smirked as I fondly recalled the many nights we'd spent romping between the sheets. Well, I'd had a lover action, that is. I wish my parents had told me how much effort they took to take care of before they passed. Besides, it needed to be big enough to fit it. As I stepped out from the stairs and into the burial chamber, I flicked off my pip-buck light again and let the natural glow of the room take over. To fit what? Shadow asked before he too entered the chamber. Oh. Wow. Before us, still in its protective shell, sat the crystalline tree I'd spent the last few years protecting. It had dulled some over the years, and I couldn't figure out if it was because of what had happened in our world, or if it were simply the natural order of trees as they grow old and die and renew. There it is, sis! The cheerful voice of Pi resonated from the small room. I turned to find the small pink face display on a pip-buck in the corner. Gage gave out a small yawn before she pulled herself to her hooves. She offered a small wave as her horn flickered, tweaking the thick-framed glasses at the end of her muzzle. The wrinkles around her eyes betrayed the fatigue she felt. The numerous winces that she gave told me that her muscles still gave her troubles every now and again. Finally, you took forever. She smiled before holding a hoof out to me shakily. Instead, I stepped forward and wrapped my hooves around her. She gave a small squeak before laughing. Yeah, always with the hugs. How did you even get this in here? Shadow asked, taking a step towards the tree. Kiwi and Cinnamon rigged up some sort of magical amplifier that helps to accurately teleport things. She raised her hoof and tapped at her horn with a well-aged cyber hoof. Still, nearly burned myself out doing it, but we managed to get it up and over here without much issue. Still, you didn't have to wait for me, I said, letting her go with a pat on the back. Stepping back, Shadow pressed up against my side and wrapped his wing around me. At the very least, I could have shown up sooner. And that roused another laugh from her. I guess that's true. She nodded softly. But sometimes it's nice to just slow down and rest a while, to clear your mind. She closed her eyes as a wide smile crossed her muzzle. Ah, to be young again. What? You're looking better than ever. I rolled my eyes and shared a laugh. At least twice as good as Prettiest ever will. Not that any of us can age as gracefully as you, Storm. She shook her head. These last 3 decades have started to take a toll on me, and sometimes I wonder where all the time went. With a wave of her hoof, she sat down. Still, some days I wonder what every pony is up to. Opening her eyes again, she stared at me. In them, I could see the light of hope burning in them, even after all these years. Speaking of the devil, how's Prettiest holding up? With a sigh, I dropped my gaze to the floor. It's not been easy for him. Mostly he's been out on the road, and it can be years between visits. Honestly, I miss the bastard. He'd been around just long enough for Lever to be born before starting his pilgrimage, and now I'm lucky if he stops by for more than a day. I'm afraid that one of these years he just won't show up anymore. Pre's a smart guy, Shadow said, leaning in and kissing my cheek. I blushed like I did every time he kissed me, and I couldn't help but giggle as his peppery beard tickled at my chin. He'll come around if things go downhill. A soft beep emitted from Gage's pip-buck, making her draw her cyber hoof up with a sigh. Ah, Well, looks like Ditsy-Doo is back at the ship. She groaned, pulling herself up to her hooves. As always, Storm. It's been a pleasure. She weakly smiled as I got up and gave her another quick hug. You know, you should really think about heading out west for a visit sometimes. I know the girls would love to see you again. How are they, by the way? Shadow spoke up. Last I heard, they were building something for Harmony's grandson? Yeah, turns out that a magnetically powered rebar cannon isn't exactly a cult-friendly birthday gift. She smiled before turning toward the door. As she did, she stopped and hung her head slightly. Last month, however, we lost Salsa to pneumonia. The others are holding up, but the shop isn't the same without the spunk she brought to it. I'm sorry to hear that. Shadow sighed, taking a step away from me. However, I did want to talk to you about that rumor that Feature heard from out your way. Mind if we talk to you, while you go to your ride? Feature? No, there's a name I haven't heard in a while. She paused, thinking about it for only a moment before answering. Sure. Gage smiled, turning back and offering a wave. See you around, Storm. Shadow looked back with a sad smile as he followed her up the steps. I'll give you some alone time here, all right? He spoke, keeping those dark blue, unwavering eyes gazing at me. I'll meet you back home. Sure thing. I nodded, turning myself around and looking at the tree. Closing my eyes, I listened as their hoofsteps climbed up and away from me. With the two of them out of ear's reach, I let out a long sigh and raised my hoof to my neck. I slid it around the golden necklace, reaching around to the back of my neck. With a soft click, I unclasped it. Carefully, I set it down against the base of the tree and let out a sigh of relief. Stepping forward, I walked up to the base of the tree. The small gem in the center of the necklace didn't glow as brightly as it once had. In fact, it looked dimmer than I'd ever wanted it to be. However, the small flame in the center of it still burned intensely. I'd fought hard over the years, fighting against raider lords, slavers, magical abominations, and wartime mechanizations. Each one had threatened the hope of the wasteland, and each time I'd used my element to defeat it. Sure, Gage was correct. I hadn't aged like most ponies do. However, I could feel myself becoming more and more drained. The thought of burning through my allotted time didn't scare me half as much as leaving the wasteland without some pony to defend hope. And that's why I'd been so hard on lever action, and that's why she's ended up in a raider den nearly dead. There was hope in me that one day her daughter could take over my mantle, to protect Hope as I once had. However, with how I'd failed before, I thought it prudent to take measures to protect my element and the Tree of Harmony. Only a few knew of the construction of this place. Sheepshot had seen to that. Although I'd had to lie to them and tell them it would be a tomb for me. Then again, that wasn't so much of a lie. Even now, I felt at peace here. My place was with the elements, and when I die, I already informed Lever to bury me down here. But who knew when that would be? I still had plenty of fight in me, and I intended to make good use of it. Reaching around my saddlebags, I flipped them open. Reaching in, my hoofs scraped against the old and tarnished golden helmet inside. Pulling it out, I tried to use my jacket sleeve to polish the gold up a bit, but to no avail. Carefully, I set it down next to me. Again, reaching my bags, I wrapped my fetlock around another cold metal object and pulled it out. The cracked golden blade that a more dedicated pony than me had once used, glinting in the soft glow of the tree. Reverently, I set it down at the base of the tree next to my element, before reaching back and placing the held helmet on the side opposite of it. Taking a step back, I closed up my saddlebags and fastened up my jacket. Sealed away, Hope could be protected for now. I still had so much to do before I could allow myself to pass along my mantle. Iron and Night still proved to be a problem for all these years, and needed to be hunted down. Prettius still needed to be freed from the burden he shouldered from me for so long, And then there was Ficha, who had his own curse that he'd sought to resolve. However, those could be dealt with tomorrow. I needed to take them one step at a time, and the first step was to seal this place until it was needed. Turning around, I flicked my light on my pipback, and headed up the steps again. Opening the door to my house my parents left me, the warm and crackling fire greeted my cold coat. I stomped on the snow from my hooves, and did my best to brush off my coat before I stepped inside the warm interior. As I shut the door, I noticed Lever-Action's coat was still absent, and there was a soft click from the kitchen, and the radio inside kicked on. "Airy Pony, as some of you might remember, tonight marks another anniversary of the Great Battle of Baltimore." DJ Pony's sounds just as relaxed as they always had, even if the subject matter he talked about never brought happy thoughts to my mind. To remember those brave souls who fought during that long and terrible winter, we have a song lined up for you all from one of our own talented residents, Miss Shamrock. "Of all the money that I ever had, I spent it in good company." The voice of a mare began to sing as I sighed. "Oh, hey," Shadow said, ripping me from my thoughts as he poked his head out from the kitchen. "Lever's still at the shop dealing with the customers there. She said she might be a little late for dinner, which has to bake for at least another hour anyway. So I don't know what she's worried about." "All right," I said, carefully removing my own leather jacket and hanging it up. "You know, that shop of hers has really taken off. I'm not not saying the circumstances were worth it, but I think she's really good at being a merchant. Well, at least a hell of a lot better than she was at being a bounty hunter." The tiniest of yawns in my ears from in the den. A shadow shifted along the wall as a small figure walked past the fireplace. The tiny hoofsteps reminded me that even Lever's time in the raider den was adherent to think about. It had given us one thing to be thankful for. "Grandma?" The tiny green filly rubbed her eyes with a hoof, while her frizzled red mane drooped over one of her eyes. The wildest smile parted her lips before she gasped and ran up to me, hugging my foreleg. "You're back!" "Of course I am," I said with a light laugh. Reaching down, I scooped her up in my forelegs and pulled her into a tight hug against me. "I told you I'd be back this year, in time for hearthwarming. Didn't I, little one? And all the harm that I've ever done, alas, it was to none but me." The mare on the radio continued to sing as I walked Little Percussion Cap over to the old couch and sat her down on it. As I did, Shadow trotted into the room. I rolled my eyes as he darted his eyes between me and the faded blue apron he wore that read, "Kiss the Cook." With a grumble, he walked himself over and leaned down to me. With his hoof on my chin, he kissed me the same as he always had over the 3 decades. My legs wobbled as they always did, and I could feel the heat radiating off my cheeks as he pulled back. Carefully, he pulled me into a rocking hug, and I simply pressed into his warmth. "You!" PC giggled as she hid her muzzle behind my foreleg. Keeping his muzzle against the side of my neck, he spoke in a whisper. Gage confirmed the rumors. He stroked my neck with his wing. Night and Iron are indeed out west. That was definitely good news. Maybe this time we could catch them off guard. We could head out tomorrow. "Ah," PC whined. "But you just got here." "And all I've done, for what of wit, to memory now I can't recall." The radio played softly as I thought about it. Even though I didn't age like most mares, I still had a limited time to spend with those around me. We had something to go on for Iron and Night at least, and that was more than we'd had in years. Still, maybe I'm going soft, but I deserve a break. "You know what?" I said softly, giving Shadow his own kiss on the cheek. "Let's wait until after the holiday." "You mean it?" PC gasped as she bounced off the old couch. Its springs squeaked horrendously under the the worst assaults it had since lever action was just her age. Even then, lever was the worst assault it had had ever since I was a filly. Yes, sweetie. I nodded as she giggled and bounced even higher. So fill to me the parting glass. Good night, and joy be with you all. The mare on the radio sang out, brightening the flame of hope that, even though it was weak, I could still feel from all across the wasteland. You know, maybe you're right. Shadow nodded, brushing at his graying beard. Goddesses, I can't even recall the last holiday we spent off work with lever at all. With a bouncing wail, PC leapt off the couch and straight up onto Shadow's back. Oh no, you got me, he laughed, stumbling at the side before lowering himself down to the fire with a groan. PC giggled and sat down on him triumphantly. I'm the best bounty hunter in the wastes, just like you are, Grandma. She beamed a smile at me that brought me hope and struck fear in me at the same time. In time, PC, I spoke softly. You still have a lot of growing to do before you can decide what you want to do. Of all the comrades that I ever had, they are sorry for my going away. I sat and wondered just what she'd ended up getting herself into as she grew up. Would she follow me and overtake the mantle I wore? Would she fail miserably like Lever did? Sitting in thought, I almost missed her tiny little gasp. Grandma, will you tell me that story again? She sat up attentively on Shadow, leaning forward with her ears perked high in anticipation. Again? I asked in disbelief. Aren't you tired of hearing it? No way! Not when you're the most amazing mare of amazingness that's ever lived. She bounced giddily on Shadow, much to his discomfort. He looked up at her with a stern glare and tickled at her side with one of his feathers. She nearly collapsed in a giggle fit before he stopped. And all the sweethearts that ever I had, they would wish me one more day to stay. As I half listened to the mare in the background, I figured that all nights like this was one that needed to be remembered on it. We'd lost too many for me to so easily dismiss a chance to make them live again through their story. All right then, I sighed, moving and slowly sitting myself down on the couch. As I did, the front door creaked open and Lever's muzzle poked in. She smiled as she saw me, and I smiled back at her. Here's the story of the long winter, I began, reclining into the old couch and getting settled in for the night. But since it falls into my lot that I should rise and you should not, I'll gently rise and I'll softly call, good night, and joy be with you all. It was one rainy day, I began, closing my eyes and remembering it as if it were all just yesterday. I had just returned to New Appaloosa from a job. In the end, Shadow had chosen to forgo the life he'd once had, in favor for one he could make with the mare he grew to love. Never once did he question his choice to stay below the clouds, and not once did he leave Stormside. His devotion to his wife and her friends was second to none, and less he needed to wear the armor he'd donned so readily in the past. Finally sledding down after the fight in Baltimore, the two of them decided to start a family of their own. Nearly a year to the day of the final assault, their daughter was born. It was the high point of Shadow's life, and along with Storm, the two raised their daughter in peace. But as it does, the wasteland catches up with all good-hearted ponies. Nearly 30 years later, on a cold winter's night, Shadow was gunned down by Iron and Night Cross, after having tracked down the pair on a rumor. With his last breaths, he struck down Nightcross, killing her in front of her own sister. His body was taken by Storm after Iron fled, and she began the slow trek home. Finally, he was laid to rest in a small plot behind Harmony's shop in Dodge, where Storm often stops by to tell him of all the events in her life, and how much he is missed by all who knew him. The night of the final fight, Iron and Night Cross fled Baltimore with those Pegasi loyal to them. The two incestuous sisters traveled northwest across the wastes, murdering and pillaging what settlements they could find along the way. Eventually, the trail of destruction that the group left ran cold and ended with a dead end for those looking to take down the rogue faction. For a time, it seemed as if Iron and Night had accepted their fate of a life below the clouds, and had found a place for their faction to settle. However, after nearly 2.5 decades of silence, they attempted to contact their sister Grand Cross above the clouds. 3 raptors descended upon the wastes, scouring the lands for the wanted mares, only to come up empty. However, the move had tipped their hand, and the word began to spread about the mares they had been looking for. Eventually, those words made their way to the small brothel oftenly frequented by a wandering zebra mercenary, who couldn't wait to tell some old friends the great news. After the fabled long winter had thawed, Proteus gathered up his things and left his friends behind. Filled with the hope that Storm had given him, he decided that he would begin to search for a way to end the curse that he had so willingly accepted. Traveling to the far corners of the wasteland and beyond, his trips became longer and longer, spanning years before he would return to his friends once more. However, even with the extensive knowledge he had gained from nearly over 4 decades, there was no new leads on any way to expel the curse from himself, and his hope began to grow dim. However, the rumors of a stable stallion taking over Philadelphia spurred his interest, as the stallion was told to have access to unheard amounts of information and resources. With one last visit to Storm, he made her promise that if no hope could be found, that she were to be the one to end his life before the curse took him. With the knowledge of their agreement firmly in place, Proteus walked into Philadelphia with his last shred of hope. The stallion who would finally walk out, however, was no longer the same. Harmony wasted little time in restarting the business that had been her family's livelihood for decades. After recovering from the wounds she'd suffered from the final fight in Baltimore, she fashioned herself up some junk prosthetics and got back to work. Hiring mostly the refugees from other settlements to scavenge what was left from Sunshine City, she reinvigorated the wasteland economy. In the rebuilt city of Dodge, she promoted a new community to form. With only her husband Oilcan by her side, and a set of twins on the way, Harmony finally took time to sit back and take in all that she'd accomplished. During that downtime, she made a trip back to Manhattan with Shortstaff to finally lay to rest the rest of their family to rest. For another 2 decades, she ran Sunshine Caravans out of her home in Dodge, right up until her grandfoals were born. When she finally hoofed over the business to her daughter, Leaf Spring, she was approached by her son with a proposal. After listening to him carefully, Harmony gave Splitlock the supplies and pony armor to set up a West Coast hub for the Sunshine Caravans. Along with him, she sent Kiwi's girls and Gage in the hope that they could make the business successful enough so that Splitlock's own son could one day take over. Even today, in her old age, she still steps in when a customer comes in with a hard job or a complaint. Stubborn and prideful to the bitter end, Harmony won't ever let a customer rip her off, and has only ever let one debt go unpaid for all these years. However, she always claims that, with no receipt for Storm's pip-buck, no pony could ever prove that she'd let the debt go at all. After all the fighting was over, Gage and her brother stood as the only ones left of their family. With nothing to tie them down to the city that they once called their home, the two abandoned the new order that Cottage had enforced in the Steel Rangers and followed Harmony south to the remains of Dodge. For a time, things were calm. Gage worked hard as one of the traveling merchants, often taking long runs to places with high-tech salvage such as Hoovington and Las Pegasus. Diesel, however, not the merchant type, opted to travel with her, using the training he'd received as a Steel Ranger to act as a bodyguard for his sister's caravan. However, only after a decade, while on a routine run between Baltimore and Dodge, Diesel was killed by a raiding party. With the loss of her brother weighing heavily on her mind, Gage decided to accept the position of manager when Harmony's son wished to expand the caravans out west. In the days since then, she's helped him grow and work with him to restore an old airship that she one day hopes will help make the trek out east again to visit her friends. Pi opted to stay with Gage after the fight in Baltimore, rather than returning to Storm's pip-buck. For years, she grew closer and closer to Gage, growing to love her as one pony would another. For the caravan, her job was to monitor caravan communications and to relay messages between them. When Gage decided to move out west, Pi opted to still keep up the communication network in her spare time, still keeping in frequent contact with Storm and Harmony. Even though Pi had never been designed for it, she felt happy and content with her life outside the orchard. Even so, she would hop across the Spritebot network now and again to make sure that her birthplace was still intact. However, as she and Gage grew older, she realized that it was time to finally leave the orchard behind for good. With the help of Gage and Kiwi's group, they used the newly repaired airship to remove the Tree of Harmony and to move it out to Baltimore, where it now still stands to this very day. For Kiwi, Salsa, and Cinnamon, the choice to leave the Rangers was an easy one. With the promise of a job in the new home of the Sunshine Caravan Trading Outpost, the trio set out to make a new life together. With the technical specialties of each of the mares so heavily developed, Harmony commissioned and built a workshop for them. There, the three ate, lived, and slept together as they tinkered and rebuilt the various unique pieces of junk that Harmony had brought into her shop. Even though she hadn't quite gotten the hang of it, Kiwi acted as the leader of the group, keeping them together through thick and thin. During Harmony's pregnancy, Kiwi took over running the Sunshine Caravans until Harmony was back on her hooves. When asked if any of the three were ever going to find a stallion for themselves, all three mares would just giggle and insist that the love that they had for each other was all they ever needed. After a few decades of tinkering, building, and working, the three mares grew tired of the day in and day out of their lives. When Harmony's son had proposed setting up shop in the West Coast, the trio jumped on the chance to go and see the wasteland. With a teary-eyed goodbye, and one last visit to the mare who'd saved Baltimore all those years ago, the three headed out west for new, rubble-filled pastures. With the fighting over, Feecha's life resumed much as it had for over a century and a half. He had stopped for a time to aid in the rebuilding of the wasteland, but as it always was for him, it was never for long. Even when Shazam had finally been rebuilt and he was offered to take over as mayor of the town, he simply refused and went on his way. For years he took odd jobs around Manhattan, Philadelphia, and Baltimore, at least up until Storm asked him for a favor. Figuring that it would at least keep things interesting, Feecha headed out west at the request of Storm. There he wandered the wastes as a mercenary for hire, stopping in every bar and every brothel to listen and take in the loose talk thrown around in them. It was nearly 2 decades after he arrived, and word of a massive search for a pair of Enclave mares met his ears. With his job finished, he returned to Storm with a rumor, and once again ready to go on his way. Before he went, however, Storm finally asked him how he managed to live for all these years without aging a single day. Thinking to himself that perhaps one day he would see fit to finally reveal the true nature of his curse, he simply laughed and headed for the door. As he left, the last word he said to Storm insisted that someone as handsome and charming as himself just couldn't be put down. Much to the aggravation and annoyance and relief of both Storm and Shadow, Feecha walked out the door and out of their lives yet again. However, as had been the case throughout Storm's life, they were fated to meet once more down the road. Despite their horrific experience at the hooves of Phileas, Stratus and his daughter Swivelspark found that returning to their old way of life wasn't hard. Once Shadow had recovered from his wounds at Tenpony Tower, he gave his account of events to GJ Pony, so that the story of what Storm had done for the waste could be spread. Afterwards, he and Swivel resumed scavenging the old ruins of the old world, this time avoiding any that they found that looked to be from even before the Great War's time. Years after, on a trip out west, Stratus fell ill and passed away. Without a clear direction for herself, Swivel continued out west to catch a ride with Shortstaff's caravan. Upon reaching the ruins of Las Pegasus, Swivel began to look for work around town. She quickly made a name for herself as one of the more successful scavengers in the small city, and after a few years she felt like there was something missing in her life. That is, until one day she stumbled into Demi Octavios, the stallion who ran the local radio station. Still enamored with her own short stay in Tenpony and her father's talk with the DJ so long ago, Swivel began to stop by Demi's workplace more and more. Soon their meetings became more than that, and the two of them realized that they couldn't live without one another. A couple years after the two had met, Swivel gave birth to a healthy pair of twins that she named Eighth Note and Silver Note. Swivel grew to forget the terror she felt in the days of Phileas, but she would always recount the story for her foals whenever she could. While her son Eighth took his father's place in the radio booth, Silver, however, had become enchanted as she grew with the story of the Blue Phoenix. It was only the day after Swivel died in her sleep that her daughter set out to seek the mare she'd grown up hearing so much about. Eighth Note, on the other hoof, had a different role to play in the coming events of Las Pegasus. But that is a story best saved for another time. Following the growing migration, Pendergrass tried to do right by his godson and nephew, Finn, and moved out east. With only the few precious heirlooms that they could pull from the rubble of Sunshine City, the two traveled the roads, scavenging what little they could along the way. In the time that the arduous journey had taken, Pendergrass recounted to Finn the stories of their family, how each member had been a hero in their own time, including Finn's parents. These stories stuck with Finn, running through his head again and again, until he found an outlet one day by joining Storm's growing crew. Pendergrass watched as Finn grew into a fine stallion. Alas, Pendergrass soon was killed in a fight with Iron's faction of Pegasi. Following the death of his uncle, Finn went into hiding, not knowing why they were attacked. Upon taking refuge in a cave just outside of Las Pegasus, something odd happened. A locket that Finn had as a keepsake from his father began to hum. Upon further inspection, Finn realized that the cave he was hiding in housed a stable, Stable 13. When a loud rumbling noise shook the cave due to a large door opening for seemingly no reason, in the years that followed he managed to make a home for himself among those who resided within the stable. However, he knew that one day he would eventually have to leave. With that in mind, he soon fell in love with a mare named Greenleaf, and they had a son whom they named Sawyer. However, this happiness was soon to be cut short. Greenleaf knew that Finn would have to leave eventually, and with a pained heart, she helped him open the stable door. It is uncertain what happened to Finn after he left Stable 13, but this memory will live on in his son, for he left behind his locket to his family so they could remember him. The great steel door of Stable 13 had once again been shut. However, it would only be a little over a decade before that door would once again open, and a new chapter was written in Pendergrass' family history of heroes. 47 years after the end of the Battle of Baltimore, the wasteland would become restless again. Temperaments were high, resources at an all-time low, and it seemed as if the whole western coast had become a boiling point. For those who survived the many conflicts over the years couldn't be sure of the events soon to unfold, but they knew that they would soon need another hero to step up and protect them. Unknown to them, the hero would be the most unlikely of ponies to have that title. So ends the heroic tale of Storm Rider, from a simple bounty hunter to a courier of hope across the wasteland. She stands as a beacon for those who fight for a better tomorrow, and until her last breath, she will lead those ponies into battle against all who threaten hope itself. It is an endless fight, one she knows well. But again, the wasteland is changing and the storm of war is once again on the horizon. However, in the face of Storm Rider, war isn't something she's afraid of. Because war never changes.